Most of the attention at the moment is focused on events overseas, and this is understandable to some extent, as the current conflict in the Middle East is obviously very important and has far-reaching implications. The problem is that, first of all, our own leaders do not appear to be focusing on the right things as it relates to that conflict. Namely, they should be focusing on doing everything they possibly can to avoid World War III. Like, that should be the top priority, but they seem entirely uninterested in avoiding a global conflict. If anything, they're motivated in the opposite direction. Many of them seem to want a world war, and if they want it, then they'll get it. Second, as our gaze is directed at events thousands of miles away, our own country finds itself in an increasingly dire situation. We may soon have a sort of Middle East-style chaos in this country, thanks to our own undefended, unprotected borders. In fact, I probably shouldn't use the word may. There's no may about it. It will happen. We are inviting it. And I'll show you what I mean. But first, let's go back to one of the biggest lessons from 9/11, which is that hindsight bias can get people killed. So here's how a lot of people thought prior to 9/11. They figured, well, no terrorist has ever hijacked or has hijacked a U.S. commercial aircraft anywhere in the world for well over a decade. At that point, it's been a decade. And they certainly have never flown them into buildings. And therefore, it's crazy to worry about any terror group hijacking planes and flying them into buildings. They haven't done it before. Pretty much everyone in aviation thought like that. In fact, just months before 9/11, the leader of a major pilot safety association publicly opposed the idea of reinforced cockpit doors. And he said, quote, "Even if you make a vault out of the door, if they have a noose around my flight attendant's neck, I am going to open the door." So there's no point in having the reinforced doors, was his point. The 9/11 Commission put that quote in their report because the pilot's attitude reflected FAA guidance at the time, which stated that airplane crews should basically just do whatever hijackers want because there's no way that they're going to grab the controls and turn the plane into a missile, for example. Well, the moment the terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners and flew 3 of them into buildings and 1 of them into the ground, everybody on the planet immediately understood how wrong the old way of thinking was. You don't discount the risk of a particular type of terrorist attack by saying it hasn't happened yet. Instead, you look for vulnerabilities in the existing system that we have, because obviously, the bad guys are doing the same thing. And that was supposedly all learned and settled after 9/11. But apparently, this lesson has not been learned, or at least it's been forgotten, or just ignored, at least in Washington. Last month, Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee held a hearing to investigate how an operative with ties to ISIS had managed to smuggle more than a dozen migrants from Uzbekistan into the United States through the southern border. Now, the FBI still has no idea exactly how many Uzbekistanis this ISIS smuggler allowed into this country, nor do they have any way to track them all down. They're lost in the wind, which isn't surprising given that this past fiscal year, there were more illegal crossings at the border than at any other time in the history of this country. Well, how are Democrats' preferred, quote-unquote, immigration experts responding to this development? For a lesson on that, here's a clip from last month's House Judiciary Committee hearing in which a vice president at the Libertarian Cato Institute explains that Republicans are fear-mongering about the border. Why? Well, because illegal migrants haven't conducted any terrorist attacks yet. Watch.
The title of this hearing is Terrorist Entry Through the Southwest Border. When I first heard that was the title, my reaction was, what terrorist entry through the Southwest border? 0 people have been murdered in attacks committed by terrorists who entered as illegal immigrants. 0 people have been injured in attacks committed by terrorists who entered illegally. 0 attacks have been carried out by immigrants who entered illegally.
So that's the logic. It's kind of a pre-9/11 logic, and Democrats are nodding along. Terrorists haven't used the wide-open southern border to conduct a large-scale terrorist attack so far, and therefore you're paranoid for thinking that it's a possibility. That's the idea. And pretty much every Democrat in Congress endorses this view, which is, it's kind of like saying that you should just leave the door of your house wide open at night while you go to sleep because, well, you've never been the victim of a home invasion robbery before. It hasn't happened yet, and therefore it will never happen, and therefore there's no reason to do anything to prevent it from happening. This is how they're responding to the news that ISIS is bringing in migrants from Uzbekistan that are completely unvetted. We don't know anything about them. That's despite the fact that Uzbekistan has a long history of exporting terrorists to this country. On Halloween night in 2017, for example, a 29-year-old Uzbek migrant who was here on a visa drove a truck into pedestrians and cyclists in Manhattan, killing 8 of them and wounding many more. That attack followed the sentencing of another Uzbek migrant, also here on a visa, who was found guilty of terrorism charges for planning to bomb Coney Island. Democrats and libertarians, apparently, want you to ignore all of that because those Uzbekistani terrorists didn't arrive through the southern border. They came on a plane. Therefore, they're saying you have no reason to worry about border security because they would come on a plane. It's a totally nonsensical approach, obviously, but that's what they're going with. And Republicans, for the most part, they're not focused on it one way or another. They want you to focus on Ukraine and the Middle East. Mitch McConnell, who somehow is still in office, says Ukraine is our top priority right now. As a result of this bipartisan consensus in Washington, this decision to focus on every other border except our own, there's now a very real risk that Americans will die. In fact, Americans are already dying, if not from terrorism, then from gang violence and other kind of violence that comes across the border. As CNN reported, the episode involving the ISIS smuggler was so alarming that an urgent classified intelligence report was circulated to President Joe Biden's top cabinet officials in their morning briefing book. For some counterterrorism officials, it shows that the U.S. is deeply vulnerable to the possibility that terrorists could sneak across the southern border by hiding amid the surge of migrants entering the country in search of asylum. Now, to be clear, the Biden administration, they aren't simply ignoring the problem. That'd be bad enough. They are actually facilitating it. Last week, Pure Talk announced that they would alleviate $10 million in veteran debt by Veterans Day. How are they going to do it? Well, by giving a portion of every new order to this cause. Thanks to your support, Pure Talk is 27% to their goal with 3 weeks to go. Our veterans gave everything to protect our nation, and Pure Talk understands the sacrifices they've made. When you switch to Pure Talk and their lightning fast 5G network, they'll donate a portion of every new order to this noble cause. You can make a real difference just by choosing superior cell phone service, a win-win for everybody. Pure Talk's plans start at just $20 a month, offering unlimited talk, text, more data, and a mobile hotspot as well. Just go to puretalk.com/Walsh and make the switch. Let's rally together, show our unwavering support for our veterans. Visit puretalk.com/Walsh and switch to Pure Talk today. It's the right move, and it's the American way. After 9/11, the U.S. government started using a category called special interest aliens, which is kind of a funny euphemism, but the idea is to flag migrants coming from countries that promote terrorism, such as Uzbekistan. These are the special interest aliens. The idea was to be transparent with Americans about who exactly is coming into this country and from where. But the Biden administration has decided to hide all of that data because they don't want us to know. At the same hearing we just showed you, Todd Bensman of the Center for Immigration Studies also testified. He told lawmakers that, quote, the Biden administration has taken steps to obscure the number of special interest aliens from the U.S. public, ending routine reporting of these apprehensions by nationality. And indeed, on the Border Patrol website, they don't list the number of special interest migrants coming from the vast majority of Muslim countries. They don't want you to know how many people ISIS could be bringing to this country from places like Uzbekistan and other places. But many of those numbers have leaked out anyway, in spite of the Biden administration's best efforts. And Todd Bensman told the House Judiciary Committee what those numbers show. It turns out that our southern border is so overwhelmed with migrants that we're not able to effectively screen special interest aliens at all. Watch.
Expect those screening programs to be degraded indefinitely because vast numbers of special interest aliens are currently pouring through the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama. Usually 10,000 migrants or less pass through the gap. In 2023, however, 300,000 plus have gone through the gap. And whereas only 3,000 or 4,000 special interest aliens among them reached our southern border annually, the Daily Caller just reported that 75,000 came in just the last 9 months. DHS cannot possibly vet or even interview a fraction of these numbers, raising the terrorism risk. And whereas about 20 aliens on the terror watch list were caught at the southwest border in prior years, since this crisis began in 2021 through the end of July, Border Patrol apprehended an almost implausibly large number of them, 258 as of now. Those watch-listed 258 are just the ones Border Patrol managed to catch. Border Patrol failed to apprehend a record-breaking 1.8 million migrants who slipped into the interior.
Now, those numbers don't seem even possible. Between October 2022 and August 2023, that's less than a year's time, more than 75,000 special interest aliens were encountered by Border Patrol. Before the current border crisis, that number of special interest aliens encountered by Border Patrol officials was closer to 3,000. And these are just the migrants that were encountered. The actual number of special interest aliens arriving at our borders is far larger, though it's impossible to know how many. And again, these are just the people coming from countries that the U.S. government believes are a high-risk terrorist states. We're also importing the rest of the third world, too, without any vetting whatsoever. Along with depolicing, that's leading to a drastic increase in violent crime rates in this country, all over the country. We're not taking in families or stable households. We're taking in mostly young men with no ties to this country, no loyalty to this country, and very little to lose. And in response, a lot more migrants are coming our way. This was the scene in Mexico recently, as yet another large group of migrants, apparently from Haiti, broke through barriers at a refugee office. Look at this. So you see that there, and you can see the crowd for yourself. When Democrats talk about illegal immigrants, they want you to imagine mothers with young children fleeing poverty and oppression, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, they tell us, because they think that a poem engraved on a large statue carries the weight of law and should actually determine our immigration policy. But that does not really describe a great number of the migrants pouring across the border. There are some mothers with young children, okay, but what you just saw in the video, there was a bunch of young military-aged males. And one of the things about those people is that these are the sorts of people who could be of use in their own countries. They could be trying to improve their own homes, fighting to make their own countries prosperous, or at least livable. I mean, imagine if these countries actually retained all of their young, able-bodied, strong males to help actually, literally, and in every other sense, build the country. But instead, they all come here to take advantage of the welfare state. And they come here not always with the best intentions. This is what happens when politicians promise free health care to illegal aliens, as every Democratic Party presidential candidate did in the last election. It's what happens when the President of the United States announces his commitment to making America less white and decides to defame any Border Patrol officer who tries to enforce the law. It's what happens when we are more concerned with other countries' borders than our own. This is why people from Haiti and so many other countries are heading for the U.S. border, which is not even remotely secure. ISIS sees this happening. Every terrorist organization on the planet sees it happening. They saw the atrocities that Hamas was able to commit against Israel, which has one of the most closely surveilled and guarded borders on the entire planet. There's no doubt that they're looking at that, and then they're looking at our open border, and they're seeing an opportunity to commit similar acts of barbarism in this country. It's not fear-mongering, it's just the reality. Courtesy of ISIS, there's reason to believe that many of these terrorists are already here. And we can respond to that reality either by closing and militarizing the border and beginning mass deportations, or we can do nothing and just get ready for the inevitable. There will be an attack. The left will pretend again to relearn the lessons of 9/11 all over again. And American citizens, who are the only citizens our leaders are supposed to protect and defend, will die as a result. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.